Okay, good evening and welcome to the community room here at the Needham Free Public Library for the start of our fall program sponsored by the Library Foundation in Needham. We are kicking off our fall series of programs. We are very pleased to be able to have Dr. Jen Tosti-Kharas, who is the Camilla Latino Spinelli Endowed Term Chair and Professor of Management at Babson College. She teaches organizational behavior and leadership in the undergraduate, graduate, and executive programs, and also conducts research and offers coaching about what it means to craft a meaningful career. Before landing at Babson, Jen worked as a strategy consultant at Accenture, where she specialized in the communications, media, and entertainment industries. She has also appeared as a contestant on the television game show Cash Cab, and speaking of meaningful work, has officiated one marriage. In her new book, Is Your Work Worth It? How to Think About Meaningful Work, Jen and her fellow researcher and meaningful work seeker Christopher Michelson discuss what it means to find value in your work and the difference it can make in terms of productivity and longevity. And interviewing her tonight, we have, coming back once again, Matt Robinson, the host of the Writer's Block on the Needham channel. He's also the author of Lions, Tigers, and Bulldogs, an unofficial guide to the legends and lore of the Ivy League. As I said, this event is sponsored by the Library Foundation in Needham. We wouldn't have any programs if it was not for them. Please check them out at lfnonline.org. They are very worthy of your support. So we're actually very happy to have a start. So without further ado, our speakers for this evening.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you
everyone
so
for joining
much.
us. Thank you, then, for coming back.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me.
No, this is
so
terrific.
great.
So let's set some context. Let's define our terms. What is the meaning of work?
Okay, so to understand the meaning of work, we want to first think about what is work, right? I default to work as paid employment. In the book, we talk about work as meeting 3 criteria: being purposeful, effortful, and being recognized by society as work. And here, I want to point out a distinction between, for example, work in the house, raising kids, cleaning, cooking, things like that, that are definitely effortful, we know that, definitely purposeful, but not recognized by society as work unless we pay someone else to do those very same tasks for us. When we do it ourselves, it doesn't count. So my co-author on the book, Christopher Michelson, is a moral philosopher by training. He teaches business ethics at the University of St. Thomas, and then I'm the organizational psychologist who teaches management at Babson. So philosophers love to get into these, discussions. We could debate, if he were here, he could debate what is work for our entire time together. But for our purposes, I think of work as paid employment, and so then the meaning of work is our answer to the question, why do we work? So what do we seek to get from our work? And that can range from work as a paycheck, work as a career ladder, work as camaraderie, a way to spend our time, or a meaningful end in and of itself, a source of great fulfillment and sort of doing good in the world. The latter is what some people think only counts as work that's meaningful. But one thing that I've tried to do in my own research is glorify work for whatever end you want from it. If it matters to you, it's meaningful.
Okay. So are some jobs inherently meaningful and rewarding, or does it depend on the worker and what they're trying to get out of it?
So this is the awkward thing about being a co-author on a book, right? I'm trying to channel the collective. I'm trying to channel both of us. So my response to that as someone with a psychology training is, of course, it's subjective. So we could be in the same job title, employer, occupation, job role, everything, and you are primarily in it for the money, and I'm primarily in it for the deep sense of personal fulfillment. And it's constructed entirely subjectively in our minds, and that's one of actually the very cool things about the meaning of work, and one of the reasons we really need to study it, because again, imagine we're working in the same job role, maybe we're interdependent with each other, and we have very different meanings. Do we approach our jobs differently? How do we come together to work given those differences? But here's where my co-author, as the philosopher, would say, but there are some objective differences in what makes work meaningful. So we wouldn't say that, we just had 9/11 anniversary, a terrorist's work that could be deeply subjectively meaningful to them is valuable in society, right? We know it does. There are lots of things we could point to that are, maybe deeply meaningful in the eyes of those doing it who do a net detriment to society. So can we hold up some jobs societally to say these are doing, maximum good in the world, social work, caring professions? I was speaking to a gentleman in the audience whose daughter is a pediatric oncologist, right? Very hard to say these aren't jobs that are doing kind of a maximum societal benefit and that we could easily say are worth doing. So I think what's interesting to sort of take into consideration in this conversation is where the subjective meets the objective. So people who either have, objectively meaningful jobs and don't see them that way, or vice versa. This starts to get very interesting.
So are there things that you can do to make a job more rewarding or worthwhile, or is that also dependent on the scenario?
Well, certainly it's dependent on the scenario. And so all of this, and I should have said this, right up front, all of this depends on some level of autonomy and freedom and control over what you're doing, and frankly, some choice in what it is that you're doing for a living. So people who have to take whatever job is available that is a minimum wage job that has a lot of objective characteristics that are meaningless even, and how much I wish such jobs didn't exist in our economy, and maybe as AI and automation advances, they will no longer exist. But for now, we definitely have some jobs that I think we could look at and say, it's very, very hard, and people are taking these jobs out of desperation and need, and it's very hard to see a way that, I'm not gonna sit here and say, you have to want it more to craft a meaningful job out of that. But I would say for jobs with some degree of autonomy, freedom, and control, like the kinds of jobs I see my Babson students going into, people who live in Needham, for the most part, professional type jobs, or jobs with some ability to craft a more meaningful career. There certainly are things that can be done to make the work more meaningful. One of the things is focusing on who benefits from the work and who the work serves. And that's especially important when we're not all teachers in the classroom, or healthcare workers, or social workers who are having constant contact with those that we're trying to help directly. For some office jobs, we may lose sight in the drudgery or day-to-day, grind of what is the ultimate end goal of our company. Who is our company trying to serve, and who benefits from, is there a social mission that's involved with what the company does that we need to sort of tap into, or maybe our organizational leaders need to help us tap into to make us feel like our work is more meaningful and worthwhile. But I think the other thing I would say is some literature, some research done on this concept of job crafting is about taking your job as it's sort of specified, job description, role, responsibilities, who you interact with, and trying to do, and again, assuming that you have the freedom and choice to do so without negative repercussions, more of the work that you find meaningful, whatever that is, and less of what you don't find meaningful. And I tell, when I tell people this, it's really meant to be empowering. It means that you have to reflect and really think, and I think a lot of us, again, don't do this. We're in our day-to-day grind. What really is it that brings me joy, that makes me feel connected, that makes me feel like my work is valued, or again, is doing good in the world? And if you can change what it is you're doing to some extent, and who it is you're doing it with, those are often two paths toward finding meaningful work where maybe it didn't exist before. And certainly every job is going to have some level of the necessary evil work. Even the most meaningful professions don't feel that way every single day. My work as a college professor, when I'm interacting with students, I'm teaching in the classroom, so easy to see how my work is meaningful, but I get stuck in a really boring committee meeting. Even if it's to benefit Babson College, which I love, it's hard to stay, sometimes hard to stay in that meaningful place. So I think sort of a realistic expectation of what the meaningful work is, coupled with some sense of empowerment that I can make it better if I want to. I'm never kind of stuck, hopefully, right? I'm never kind of stuck in a job that's not, I've lost my way in terms of what makes it meaningful.
Well, speaking about your way, I wanted to go from the macro to the micro and ask how you came to your work, and then also even smaller, how you came to the book.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's so fun to think about these stories. But so I got my PhD in management and organizational psychology at the NYU Stern School of Business. I was a business undergrad major at Wharton, at Penn, our joint alma mater, and go Quakers. And then I went to be a management consultant. And this is the epitome of I was paid a lot of money. So I was rewarded in one way, and maybe a materially fulfilling way, and a little less in a spiritually fulfilling way, and realized that I had absolutely loved my experience at Wharton, especially being a TA and being sort of, the other side of the classroom. And I really wanted to become a college professor. So I went to NYU, got my PhD, and that's where I really learned there is this area of study that's about the meaning of work and meaningful work. And so my dissertation advisor, Amy Resnesky, who, funny enough, was at Stern, went to Yale School of Management, and is now at Wharton, so it all comes full circle. She had characterized this idea of work orientation, or why we work, in one of three ways, as a job, a career, or a calling. So a job is you're primarily in it for the financial rewards, extrinsic rewards, and typically money and benefits. A career, you work for the ascension within either an organizational, career hierarchy, or an occupational community where your work is respected, or finally a calling, and that's where the work is deeply meaningful in and of itself. And that opened my eyes. I write in the book, once I saw the world through that lens of job, career, calling, I couldn't unsee that typology, and I started thinking about, and you can have a hybrid, right? So you can have like a career/calling and things like that. But, and it's funny, I just got in a really heated debate about this with my undergraduate students. So I'm teaching a class now called Crafting a Meaningful Career. And my students, the assumption used to be, everyone wants callings. And how do we sort of give them realistic ideas about, well, you may not be able to find work in your area of calling, or you may get into it and it's not what you thought, or you may work yourself so hard that you burn out, or things like that. My students in my class right now, and remember, they chose a class called Crafting a Meaningful Career. They, by and large, don't want callings at all. They're like, that sounds terrible. We want to go to work and then come home and just not think about work. We want jobs, we want careers, sure, but we actually don't want work to become life. They actually said this, we don't want to work to live, we want to live to work. And I think there's something going on there, because I'm not sure that I would have said that when I was in their shoes. Again, this does not reflect all, Gen Zers, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And so then the book came out of a 20-year research career where I had realized, academics do this all the time, we love to talk to each other, and especially in a field like management, which is so applied and has so much relevance for working people, we don't tend to talk to those working people. So my co-author Christopher and I tried to say, a lot of our academic friends were publishing books, some of them doing quite well. And I thought, can we get a wider audience and talk directly to the people who could most benefit from this work? And so that's really what we sought to do, is write. We had to unlearn how to write academically and then learn how to write a book that people would actually want to read. So that's what we've tried, that's what we've humbly attempted to do here.
And I will say, having reviewed business-related books for the Herald for many years, I read this cover to cover. So that's pretty high praise. It was really great.
Well, yeah, Matt knows a thing or two about writing. So
to that point, though, what was different between writing more academic to more of a general audience book? While you were unlearning, what were the new lessons?
And this is big praise to my literary agent, without whom we would not have a book deal, no way, because our attempt to write, sort of colloquially, failed miserably. What our agent, sort of gave us as feedback was, if you're not using just blatant scientific jargon that no one outside your field is even going to understand, you're lecturing to me. And I'm an adult who bought this book. I'm going to come to my own conclusions. I don't want you to lecture me. I don't want you to tell me what I'm supposed to think and take away from this in a very, he described it as a very pedagogical way. And then I thought, well, that's what that's what our training is in. That's what we do. We're used to either writing super scientifically, where you are not supposed to vary the language. You are supposed to make it so precise and so exact and so boring. My parents, when I graduated and got my first job and first started publishing, my parents are like, why won't you share with us what you're writing? Like, we really want to read it. I'm like, Dad, here we go. You asked for it. I hand him one of my articles. He gets, literally through the abstract and says, oh, this is a lot. This is a lot. And then, the funny part, and actually I think the really revealing part about this is this book, as a result of this book, I have heard from, it's like a this is your life, right? I'm sure you found this as well. People are coming out of the woodwork, like, who I haven't spoken with in, a long time. Childhood friends, people from college, people I worked with in my first job, and everybody really cares that I published this book. And I'm like, I've been writing, I've been publishing for 20 years. Like, this is my job, this is my career. And it's almost like no one, not to say no one cares, but this just hits in a very, very different way, which has been fascinating. It's fascinating to see. But it really speaks to, writing as a craft, and you teach this, right? But knowing your audience is such a big part of it.
Right.
So who's your reader? How do you connect with them? How do you craft the message that they'll actually take it away? And we have tried really hard not to make this a book that tells you what to do or tells you surefire ways to find meaningful work, because that would be really disingenuous of us. It's such a complicated topic. So that's something I think we've tried to, keep in mind as we've gone.
Yeah. I remember when I first started out as a music critic, my grandmother called and said, why are you out till 1 in the morning every day? I was like, because the concerts don't start at 3:30 in the afternoon. So
Exactly.
not getting it is hard. But yeah, you're right. I always talk to my students about that connecting. Like, if I'm a doctor at a medical conference, I'm going to use very different language than if I'm take your parent to school day and have to explain what I do to younger people. So absolutely. So while you were doing all this research and you're asking people about meaningful work, did any of your colleagues get suspicious that something was up? You say you love what you do, but you seem to be asking kind of suspicious questions.
Either you doth protest too much, or why are you questioning this? I find, it's so funny. I teach at Babson, which is a school that has been #1 in entrepreneurship. We have an alum in the audience. I was going to say we've been #1 in entrepreneurship for something like 30 years. I always tell my students, longer than you've been alive. And so it is a school that is built on, if you're not sure where to look to start your business, do what you love. Look to your passion, look to what it is that really fuels you. And so I think the assumption, especially at Babson, is we all love what we do, and of course our work is a calling. So no one is surprised that I'm studying that, because of course our work is a calling. But I think where I see a little bit of pushback, Matt, in terms of your question, like, why are you studying this, is when people will say, well, what are you going to tell organizational leaders to do differently as a result of your book? And a logical endpoint of this book might be, if I got a group of employees in the audience, that some of them might really deeply interrogate, like, what am I doing and why? What is the bigger point of my work? Am I doing more of the work that I love and less of what I find meaningless? and they might decide to leave, right? They might decide to go do other jobs. And so, this is not a 5-point plan to sort of trick your employees into feeling like the work is meaningful. But, my response to that would always be, in a good job that allows people to feel like they're making a bigger contribution, it wouldn't feel like you're trying to trick them, right? It would feel like the work is good enough that they could find it on their own, and the employees who are leaving maybe aren't getting the message or maybe aren't connecting with the mission, and that's no one's failing, that's just a matter of fit. So, but it's not it's not really, although there are implications of the book for leadership, I would never say it's sort of a leadership book or a how-to guide for managers. And that tends to be a lot of what is in the business space. So there's like a little bit of a difference there.
So how did you think your book differs from, life fulfillment is a big theme, and we've had other authors in this series who talk about it. So where does your book fit in that? Not just work, but just value of life, and I guess maybe I also was going to ask about, were there shifts that you noticed with the pandemic, with people working from home and or you mentioned 9/11, there was a lot of reevaluating after that. So where does it fit in terms in the larger library of books about just finding value in your life and making the most of your days?
My hope in writing this book is that it would be as at home I'm picturing like a Barnes & Noble section or a library section that's about, and this label differs, but popular psychology, self-help, philosophy as it would in business. Now, I have noticed when I go to bookstores, it tends to be in business. And someone even said, look at that cover. That's clearly a business book. Like, you know what you're doing. And I'm like, my publisher clearly, made this decision for us. But it is interesting. And at one point we were, trending on Amazon in like social philosophy and industrial and labor relations. And there's all these like, idiosyncratic categories that are kind of funny, to think about. But I think I would love the book to be at home in a self-help or philosophy or something that's about how do you live a good life. Because I think that's a huge thing that motivated this book. It certainly motivated, so again, my co-author, who is a philosopher, really entered his studies with this question of what makes a good life. Like that this is our fundamental job as humans, is to answer this question. Like, what makes our lives good? And are our lives good, and how do we know? And he came into studying work because he realized, what do we do with so much of our days are spent at work for many of us, right? There's some statistic about the majority of our waking hours we spend at work, and that's either like horribly depressing or kind of inspiring, just depending on where you kind of sit with this. But to bring it back to crises like COVID and 9/11, so many of what we've both observed is that so many of us get, again, caught up in the day-to-day grind. We're doing our work, we're striving for the next deadline, we're thinking about the next promotion, we're trying to do a good job, and then maybe other concerns come in, dependent care and dual career and all this kind of stuff, and life gets really complicated. And we're just doing our work without asking these bigger picture questions about why. And what am I getting from it? And is my work good? And does my life feel good? Does work add to or detract from my sense that my life is good? But one of the times that we do ask these big picture questions is, of course, when we're faced with our own threats to our own mortality. So in 9/11, and again in the COVID pandemic, we saw a record number of people, they even called it the Great Resignation, because so many people left their jobs. And were seeking often work that felt either more meaningful and or more sustainable. It's gonna work better in my life, it's not gonna burn me out. Again, I think this is where some of my Generation Z students are just coming in, like, why would I wanna work all the time? Like, I reject the very notion, because we think more about our wellness. We think more about our ability to sustain our work and to do, what's the point of doing good work for a year or two if you're gonna burn out and never wanna do it again? So one of the aims that we had with the book was, how can we get people to ask these big picture questions in the absence of tragedy? Because the message shouldn't be we should all, an upside of these really horrible catastrophic events that reminds us that we could die tomorrow is we ask the big picture questions, right? How can we tap in to ask those questions more in our day-to-day? And certainly it's relevant if you're contemplating life transition, a career change, or if you're feeling stuck. But I kind of feel like it's a check-in that we all should be doing, like how we check in about various aspects of our health and whether various aspects of our life are working. Is our work actually, are we getting from our work what we want?
You keep mentioning Christopher. How did you find each other? And how did you decide that he was or you both decide that the other was the appropriate partner for this project?
We met at a conference for people studying the meaning of work that was across disciplines, but we found out we were both at NYU. So he still to this day does adjunct teaching in the business ethics department at the Stern School of Business at NYU. So we were both at Stern together. We met at this conference, and then we just started having conversations about what we wanted to study together. And one of the ideas that he had, but when I heard it, I thought it was one of the most brilliant things that I had ever heard, and we write about this at length in the book, is after 9/11, the New York Times created these, they were called the Portraits of Grief, and they were memorials of the people who had died in 9/11, many of whom were in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, many of whom were New Yorkers. And these were not full obituaries, but they were brief sketches of that person's life as interpreted by certainly the New York Times reporters, but also interviews with the people who knew the deceased the best. So loved ones, friends, family, coworkers sometimes. And these portraits were meant to convey what gave that person's life, that victim's life, meaning. And so Christopher kind of thought, well, so many of these people died at work, some obviously not expecting that would be a risk they would take through doing their work. Others, like the first responders who died that day, of course, too, might have reasonably expected to make that sacrifice. But certainly the financiers, people working in the World Trade Center, you wouldn't necessarily expect that. So we wanted to see through our study when work was mentioned in the Portraits of Grief, how was it mentioned? Was it mentioned as being more of a job, more of a career, or more of a calling? And what we found, again, I think at the time we were writing, it felt like the cultural message, and certainly the message within our academic field of study, was the only way to really have a work meaning that matters is when you feel your work is a calling. If your work is a job, it's just a job. It sort of cheapens it to make it about the money. But there's a portrait that I'll never forget. It's so unintentional, but kind of nice that we're doing this right after the anniversary of 9/11, because I think this is such a legacy of how we remember these victims. But these Portraits of Grief are, heartbreaking to read, but so revealing. And I think thinking about our own legacy in terms of our work, how will it be remembered, what impact will it have made, is important for us all to ask. But there's this one portrait that I want to try to quote from. I'm probably not going to do a great job, but it was of Juan Ortega Campos, and he was a delivery man for a deli that then he was going up to the offices on the upper floors of the World Trade Center, delivering food, delivering breakfast to the suits in the trading houses and investment banks that were housed up there. And his work was clearly not a calling, even in his relatives' telling of it. He was there to earn money, but he was there to earn money to fulfill a dream, and not just his dream, but his relatives back in Mexico, who saw him as the very picture of success, especially working in the financial district of New York City and sending money back home to build the family a new house and fulfill a dream. And so, we really saw that any type of work that has meaning can be elevated, especially in the eyes of those who know us well. And I thought that was such a nice, very again, it's a novel way to look at the meaning of work. It's not through the eyes of the worker, but the eyes of those who know them best. And it really does just elevate all kinds of jobs that we might dismiss as being not meaningful, as meaning an awful lot to the people who do them and to those who are invested in that work.
Yeah, just, I mean, this story, if I may for a moment, just that reminds me of is I teach over at the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office in Dedham, and I started there as a volunteer, and I was perfectly content with that. And one day my supervisor called and said, Matt, I want you to drop by my office after you teach today, which is usually never the beginning of a good meeting.
Right.
And it turned out that no one showed up that day, which occasionally happens. And so I go into his office, I said, Chris, I'm in a really bad negotiating position. He said, what do you mean? I said, nobody showed up today. He goes, oh, there was a fight last night. They were all in solitary. I didn't know they had solitary there until that point. He said, they love you. How'd you like a second class and how'd you like to get paid? And so, you know, that's just, I mean, to have that kind of relationship with a boss is pretty terrific. So to kind of wrap up, what do you hope to be able to say about your career when you do decide to move on to whatever comes next?
Yeah, it's hard to avoid grappling with those questions when you study, you know, work and legacy and things like that. So obviously, I hope that, you know, in part through the book, which again, the aim was to speak to people, you know, diverse array of working people. I just hope that something that we've written about can help people, and that's ultimately, that's the best reward. I also think a lot about my students, of course, so there's nothing better, anyone who's ever taught knows this, than hearing from a student who you haven't been in touch with for, you know, in some case now I'm getting old, so it's decades, right? And they'll come back and say, you know, I still think about what you taught me, I still think about your class, I used something that you talked about in class the other day and I thought about it, and that is just it's so gratifying. I mean, it's a huge part of why I do what I do ultimately, and I think, you know, I would just love to be, you know, remembered as someone who really tried to change the conversation about work in ways that kind of preserve the basic dignity of the people doing it and tried to elevate all kinds of work as being potentially worthy of both our eyes viewing them as meaningful and also societal respect.
Well, I just, you know, I mean, as I said, I've read a lot of business books, and this one I actually finished. So, you know, it's very relatable, and I really think no matter what you're doing with your life, it really has something to say to you. So I think you've greatly accomplished your goal.
Aww.
And please thank Christopher for us, and thank everybody else for coming. And
thank you for
Jen
being here.
If anyone has questions for Jen, otherwise we'll look to see you all again on TV or back here next month.
It's great.
Anyone?
I would love questions if you have them. Good. Did you get a mic?
Yep.
Are you going to Phil Donahue it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's Phil Donahue. R.I.P.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Jen. And I can't wait to read the book. So the only constant in life is change. And so what may be your job today may be your career coming forward. It may or may not, and may not be your calling, but it is what you're doing in the now. Does your book talk about that evolution, that change, how, you know, just because one thing is one thing for you today, it may be a stepping stone or part of your journey along the way to finding that calling?
Oh, definitely. We never would want to act like you find your calling or you find meaningful work and that's it, you know, check the box, that's it. How you introed this question could be verbatim from what I teach in my class. Because a lot of us think we make a plan, and that if we make a really thoughtful plan, that will enable us to have our careers play out a certain way. And again, COVID, you know, showed us that to make a plan is then to have the universe laugh and everything gets disrupted. So I would hope that, you know, some of the tools in the book in terms of assessing the worth of work could be useful again and again as you're faced with change, that that it's a constant reevaluation and a constant renegotiation. We share lots of stories in the book. Some of them are from our own lives, of course. Some of them are from arts and literature. And some of them are from people that we interviewed who had interesting work stories in some way. One of the people we interviewed had, I mean, one of the most interesting career paths that I can imagine. So she had training as a lawyer, worked sort of in big law, had a run as a unsuccessful candidate for local office. She at one point donated a kidney, and when we caught up with her, she had worked then for various nonprofits as a legal resource. When we caught up with her, she was 57 years old and finishing med school. So we share stories like that. I mean, both sort of stories of people seeking meaning, people whose search for meaning seemed like it was never going to happen, and people who are sort of continually reinventing themselves to try to inspire that there is no one dominant path. Wow, is this? I mean, you're a Babson alum, you know.
Number 2 in the country now, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, yeah. Sorry, Stanford, as I like to say. Number 2 in the country. As you may have heard, Wall Street Journal rankings. We're a little bit proud of that right now. But Babson students, you know, they're business school students, and they love to compare, and they love to think, if I don't already have my internship in my junior year, my career is not going to happen. Or if I don't, you know, launch myself immediately out of Babson, it's too late for me. And I just think we do so much social comparison in terms of where we should be. We feel like everyone else has a plan but us. But the research really supports that people find meaningful work in a variety of ways. Some people kind of know what they want and look to get it. Other people fall into it. They never even imagined that their work would be as meaningful as they've come to find it. And, you know, by the way, when we think about the only constant is change, a huge theme, and we dedicate a chapter in the book to that, is artificial intelligence may come and take away all our jobs. Have you guys heard? So, you know, what are we going to do in that near future? It feels ever nearer. I mean, suddenly I'm like, AI can write. It can teach, it can, like, where do I fit into this?
La 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 la, not listening.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it can do these things well or in a way that feels like a threat right now, but you know, what a real, again, if we want to get philosophical, a real question that we'd have to grapple with is, if sort of the ultimate change came and we were no longer able to do our work sort of went away, then where would we be? And I think in our society, we've become so defined, and this is such an American, you know, view. Of course, Boston, northeastern U.S., we're very, you know, obsessed with productivity, obsessed with professional status. When we meet someone, we say, "What do you do?" We know that means for work. What we do for a living is who we are. That it's hard to contemplate who would we be without work. And that may be a really productive conversation. Would our leisure suddenly become work-like? You know, would we seek to define ourselves in different ways? Would we continue to work but not for money? I don't know. There's just a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to contemplate. But yeah, I just think the future is so unknowable that we have to remain sort of flexible. And I hope we're able to do that. Yes, Emily.
So I thought it was really interesting that you said that the students did not think they were looking for a calling. And in the world of medicine these days, a lot of us kind of who've been practicing for a while, this is our major complaint about a lot of the trainees, is like, you know, way back in the day, people went into medicine to earn money, like our grandparents' generation stuff. By the time I did it, it wasn't really to earn money anymore. That's not where the money was, and we all kind of felt like it was a calling. Now I don't know what it is, but everybody wants to go home immediately. You know, if they're told to sign out at 4 o'clock, they are signing out at 4 o'clock. And if they are, you know, there's all sorts of medical errors and issues with pass off because nobody wants to do anything extra. And it's hard for those of us who don't feel that way to watch, but I'm just curious if there's something in terms of, I know you mentioned like a generational type thing in general in the research with like a change in these attitudes and what's a calling and what's for work, or if it's just your students and medicine, I don't know.
So let me first say that every generation believes that whoever are the current crop of students graduating college and entering the workforce are lazy, entitled, self-centered, okay? This is true, Gen X, this was true of us, then of the millennials, now of Gen Z. So I think there is part of it that is a stereotype that's more about the age or career stage than truly, this is a generational difference, and we Gen Xers back at that stage actually were more hardworking and less entitled and less lazy or something like that. But it is hard not to look away from a cultural conversation around, have we gotten almost too into our work? Have we let our work, and I think COVID pushed that conversation. Suddenly, many people were working, healthcare providers were working in lives it was hard for us non-healthcare workers to imagine. Same with teachers, same with K through 12 kind of education, and so many other jobs that were essential. And I think no one ever imagined playing out the way they did. But for a lot of others of us who are suddenly working from home, work bled into life bled into work. It was very hard to draw that boundary. And now I think we see, and I'm just, again, it's not necessarily systematic research, but it's more anecdotal evidence that people across a wide variety of occupations, industries, and ages and career stages are wanting to just renegotiate those boundaries. So you see people pushing back against 5 days in the office. You see people pushing back against, something we love to do. Actually, I don't even think it's just Babson. My Outlook email system is constantly prompting me, are you sure you want to send that email now? This might be outside someone's working hours, right? And it's like we're building in all these guardrails to be like, are you sure you're not encroaching on someone's private time? So there's this thing happening, and I do think it's part of the current zeitgeist, and I do think it's a very deliberate, maybe it's an overcorrection, right, from COVID, but we're seeing people trying to have a conversation about what is a reasonable boundary between work and life. And so there's part of me that wants to say that's healthy, because we might have gotten into a place where we were glorifying overwork, and that's probably not sustainable and not good for anybody. We should never have to feel like we're working all the time just to be considered a bare minimum. But you mentioned medical errors. You mentioned actually something about not just how much I'm working, but actually the quality of my work. I can't help but think that maybe that's where AI can step in and do so, right? It's like then we go, oh gosh, are humans really going to become obsolete? But I think whenever we see a marked decline in the quality of the work, how could we not worry about it? How could we not ask questions and worry about that? So I'm not willing to give up on Gen Z yet, to say nothing of my own kids who are, I'm like, what, when they get into the workforce, what's even going to be happening? But I think it's interesting. I think we're having a very evolving conversation. Great questions. Of course, yes, of course. This is awesome.
How much of what you described is corporate culture driven in the need to operationally be within certain margins, running healthcare as a business, not as a profession that is treated with respect and dignity that it should be? And so corporates everywhere, not just in the medical profession, but in every industry, are beholden to numbers. And if you're traded publicly, right, you're beholden to that earnings per share. And that is driving the cultures that we're finding ourselves in. So you, so you have the employees' ability to adapt to both nature and nurture in that environment, but you have leadership's role and the role that they play on creating the culture in which it can either be sustainable or not for those employees. Does the book look at it from both the leadership role perspective as well as the employee's perspective?
We do, and we hope that a takeaway, so I appreciate everything about what you just said. I think that is right on, and I think that in our, not to get too crazy about late stage capitalism, right? But we are in a, capitalist world or capitalist society where the driver of our worth more often than not is how much we're producing. So we're sort of obsessed with this production model of efficiency and value and worth. We get into that at length in the book, right? How do we put a monetary, how do we value work in a number of ways, one of which is monetary? And I teach management. We love to measure things and metrics, and you manage to what you manage to what you measure. And we have accomplished a lot of growth and profit on the backs of employees. I think that's partly why we're seeing so many pushbacks, not just among Gen Z workers, quiet quitting and things like this, but though these are social movements, but we're seeing organized labor coming back. We're seeing walkouts, strikes that maybe we hadn't seen in a little while. I think that's telling, right? Again, I think that's workers pushing back. And if they don't push back, no one is ever going to tell you to do less from on high. But so where we come into it from the book is that we hope that business leaders are thinking about this and are thinking about, is the work that we're giving to people, is it meaningful in a way that they can see it and feel it and experience it in their work? Are we sort of walking the talk, or is this the meaningfulness version of greenwashing, right? Where it's like, oh, we're meaningful because we made up a corporate mission that bears no resemblance to what we actually do, but we hope employees can feel good about, right? That will ring false. And are there elements of the work that are not sustainable, and how to think about, in a war for talent or talent retention, how to make sure employees don't burn out. And I think that is a really important message for leaders to grapple with, just as it is important for workers to grapple with.
As I don't want the employees here at the library to strike for keeping them too long, can we get one last question, sir? Go ahead.
Please.
Hi, I think you might have touched on this a couple of times, but in your research, have you found that someone who is pursuing a calling has to do that with all of their time and with all of their energy? 40 years ago, when I first started working, all the business people I talked to said, just put on blinders and work as hard as you can, otherwise you're not going to achieve your goals. The psychologist said, just do what you love. Sometimes they added, the money will follow. But if you're pursuing something that you think is a calling, do you feel you can have a balanced life and do it part-time and be in the garden the rest of the time?
I think that is the dream, and research, including my own, suggests that is very hard, especially the stronger you feel that calling toward a specific area. For example, people who experience strong callings often will pursue the calling at all costs. Sometimes that's financial, like the starving artist comes to mind, but doing unpaid overtime work, again, put the blinders on, don't even ask the questions, put in all the work hours possible, and don't do the calculation of what the actual hourly wage would be if you were to do that calculation. They're more likely to take work home with them, not disengage from work at the end of the day, and suffer both psychological as well as physical ill health as a result of that. So fatigue, trouble sleeping, anxiety, burnout, things like that. So it's sort of calling has been described, not by me, but by others, as a really double-edged sword. So when you feel your work is a calling, you actually feel that both your work and life have more meaning, that they're more satisfying, that you feel more engaged at work. And there's some evidence that you do better work. You're actually more productive, and the work that you do is better. You go above and beyond to help people. These are all good things. But there is, in fact, no evidence, despite the really alluring title, that the money will follow. In fact, it might be just the opposite. You might be more vulnerable to exploitation at the hands of an employer who will never again tell you, do less. You're not additionally compensated for this. You might want to stop. And there's some evidence that, the pursuit of a calling can be gratifying at first, but difficult to sustain over time, and especially when, the need to prioritize things outside of work come in. So it's truly a mixed bag. It's hard not to want to tell people. I don't want the opposite, right? So I don't want people to feel like their work should be meaningless or that they should have to put up with drudgery. But I think especially when the pursuit of a calling can feel something like an obsessive passion, which some of the people I've talked to, it really does sound like that. You just want to be careful. I think more than anything, to exploitation and mistreatment. And again, I don't want the library workers to walk off the job either. So we are going to be mindful of their time and your time. But I couldn't have loved this conversation more. Thank you to everyone for what you brought. Thank you, Matt. This is so awesome.
Well, thank you, and I'll just say how lucky am I that my calling is interviewing brilliant authors at the library. So thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.